So I wanted to ask you about the reaction to the deal in the West. And I guess this is perhaps more the commentariat, media. We have seen, certainly in the streets of my city in London, the same people who for 2 years have been crying they want a ceasefire are now on the streets not happy with the ceasefire. And they are sort of, it's quite clear what their motivation is basically until Israel no longer exists. They'll be still on the streets, I imagine. But I wanted to get your take on it. And there's a couple of different stories, but the first is, as we're talking, there's the quote unquote hostage swap, where the anti-Israel types are equating those prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, who, as far as I can see, seem to be terrorists, guilty of horrific crimes, are being swapped with hostages who were innocent and taken on October 7th. Now, you mentioned this right at the beginning of our conversation in passing, I think, but I wondered if you could explain this to someone who doesn't understand. And I'll add to this on the hostage versus prisoner story. It is the case that some of the Palestinian prisoners who have been in Israeli hands for a long time, it is the case that not all of them had trials, right? So is there any injustice on that side of the story of the Palestine prisoners?
There's no simple answer. So just to begin to wade into it, I'll say two things. One, there is an Israeli practice, which I have criticized over the years a great deal, and which my dad, who was once an attorney, who was law student, worked a little bit in politics, criticized a great deal, called administrative detention. Administrative detention is the idea that I don't have enough evidence to put the person in prison in the regular criminal justice system, where the evidentiary standard is very high and you actually have to show. But nevertheless, I know that there's a terror network here and I know who it is. And if I roll them all up and throw them in jail, it goes away. And one of the people who explained the problem of administrative detention, the moral problem is obvious. People are sitting in prison having not gone through a court system. And this was something that was small scale 30, 40 years ago and has grown because it works. The tragedy of it is that it works. Moshe Bogi Ya'alon, the former defense minister and chief of staff of the army, has said, this is absolutely problematic, deeply, deeply problematic. And when I know who it is and I throw them all in jail it has to be renewed for 6 months at a time, and you can appeal to the Supreme Court, to the High Court of Justice. But the High Court of Justice itself only requires that the secret intelligence show that this was a network, but it's not a high enough standard of evidence so the standard is nevertheless very low, even though there are some feedback mechanisms, some check mechanisms. So yes, there's this administrative detention system, which is one of the major counterterror measures that are successful, that are some of the most successful measures against these networks. And it's a huge problem. It's a huge, huge problem. I argue against it, and the argument against me is that it works. And so,
how are we measuring success when you say it works?
You'll have 11 shootings on a particular road outside of a village. And the Shabak intelligence officer in charge of that particular area of, let's say, Samaria, the northern West Bank, will have contacts and have agents and have people talking to him who know who it is. And he will inform the army, and the army will arrest them. And while they're being held on the army's arrest, day passes, a second day, a third day, a fourth day, a fifth day, and the shootings are gone. And it's 6 people who are all connected. And maybe the army will then discover, little banknotes in which they paid for the guns, and then discover the guns, and then you throw them in jail with a proper court system.
Right.
Sometimes a military court, but sometimes also, especially with terrorists, civilian, just criminal court system. But sometimes you don't find the guns. But the second you arrested them, that was the last time there was a shooting in that area.
Right.
And then what do? And the Israeli answer of administrative detention is a bad answer. But Nobody provides a different. You could obviously dismantle the entirety of military rule and pull out and establish a Palestinian state, is what, the average sort of anti-Israel person will say right now. And the funny thing is, I tend to agree with that person and what they're saying, but Gaza. In other words, if I do pull out, it'll all turn Hamas, and they will burn down that part of the country as well in the bid to destroy me and murder my children. And if they stop saying it every day of the week, 3 weeks ago, Ghazi Hamad once again said, October 7th, he's one of the major leaders of Hamas still alive, told CNN, October 7th was glorious and the dead in Gaza are part of the plan. And I'm obviously paraphrasing, but so yes, there are absolutely people in Israel's prison who haven't gone on trial. Now, if you roll up 6 people, and the shootings stop, and you don't have the kind of drilled down, detailed intelligence to know if it really was only 2 of them. And so what if 4 of them are totally innocent and still sitting in Israeli prison for 6 months, it's renewed, another 6 months, it's renewed. By the time it's 4.5 years, they still are there, and there's a terror cell, but you don't exactly know all the details. This is a very difficult, problematic thing and needs to be talked about by Israelis. The fact that it works is the big problem with it. And so, yes, that's absolutely true. Hamas doesn't fight for them. Hamas doesn't demand to get them out. Hamas throws them into the demand just to bolster the numbers, just to show they got out a lot. Hamas doesn't care who rots in prisons. What Hamas fights for is the mass murderers, is its own leadership, is the people who it considers the great warriors, meaning they massacred 12 children. The people Hamas fought for are not the 1,700 prisoners not on the life term list, but the 250 who were on the serving life sentences given to them by a court. No administrative detention, no temporary, nothing outside the court system, but within the court system because they mass murdered people. Those are the people Hamas fights for. And so there is a Palestinian case, and there is a Palestinian argument here. And I'm very sympathetic to it. And everything burns to the ground for them when Hamas gets involved, because what Hamas wants, the last hostage exchange in as it's framed, as Hamas frames it, in 2011 to get out Gilad Shalit, the soldier who was kidnapped by Hamas in 2006, and we let out over 1,000 terrorists. That included the entire high command of Hamas. That included Yahya Sinwar himself. Every single person who planned October 7 was included in that release. And the mass murderers, Yahya Sinwar was called, back in 2011 when he was released from the Israeli prison, he was called by Palestinians the Butcher of Khan Yunis. And he was given that name, that nom de guerre, because of his murders of Palestinians suspected by Hamas of collaborating with Israel. He was a mass murderer, not of Jews, but of Palestinians. And so those are the people Hamas fights for. And people should really look this up. So yes, there is a case. And as soon as Hamas enters the picture, none of it matters anymore, because they actually got the mass murderers. And those are the people they're celebrating. And those are the people they're, parading around Gaza.
Thanks for watching this clip from The Winston Marshall Show. You can click here to watch the full episode. And for more clips like this one, don't forget to subscribe. And as always, be well.